Welcome back to another episode of Interesting Questions. Thank you for joining me. Um, this is an interesting one. This is something that's been around for quite some time. It was the tomb of King Tutankhamun. It was discovered in the early 1900s, and there was mystery that kind of surrounded the tomb. One, it was the only I don't know if it's the only. I believe it's the only fully intact tomb ever discovered in Egypt. So I don't want to say it's the only because I don't know that for a fact. Maybe at that time it may have been the only fully intact tomb that had been untouched. I mean, it was, there was a chariot in there and the sarcophagus, and there was just gold and all kinds of stuff all over the place inside this tomb. Um, and it's literally one of the most intriguing discoveries in history, bar none. Um, but there's been other incidences where there have been curses linked to certain things, like there's a mummy. It was found. It was found in the snow. Found it under ice. Ice had thawed, and they found this mummy. It was called Itzy, which I plan on doing a video on that also. So I don't want to give too much of that away. But bad things happened to people who were associated with this mummy called Itzy. Also, I think too, there was a royal family. Their tomb was like excavated. They exhumed these bodies and stuff of a royal family. I think it was a British royal family. Could be wrong. Maybe it was French or something, but it was definitely European. Excuse me. And people associated with the exhuming or the excavation of this tomb, mysteriously, there was mysterious happenings where these individuals ended up dying. So, it could be just odd coincidences, or maybe possibly there is some kind of curse linked to this. So this is what this video is about. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get to the video, and we'll go ahead, we'll watch it together, and I'll iterate, give my commentary on it. But, if, if I miss anything or whatever, please leave a comment below. Or, you find this interesting or you have an opinion on it, please leave a comment below, like and subscribe. I appreciate the support. But like I said, without further ado, let's go ahead. Let's get to the video.
This picture shows the moment of Tutankhamun's tomb opening. It's the only tomb found in ancient Egypt that remained intact for 3,000 years. It appeared to be full of gold and artifacts. However, at least 13 people who were present at the tomb's opening died soon after, and a rumor about the curse of the pharaohs.
See, I didn't know it was 13. I thought for some reason maybe it was like 5 or 6 people or something. But that's pretty crazy that 13 people died soon after. That's pretty astounding.
Spread all over the world. In addition, the researchers of Tutankhamun's tomb studied the mummy, examined the attributes surrounding it, and noticed that everything was way different from what it was supposed to be. Ancient Egyptians believed that a pharaoh came close to gods after his death and spoke to them on behalf of his people. That's why the mummification process was treated with special care, and tombs were decorated with great reverence. But why did they make an exception for Tutankhamun? Why did Osiris have his fingers cut off? And why does Tutankhamun's mummy baffle historians to this day? Why does the tomb itself confuse the researcher?
I want to give a shout out right now Let's go ahead and reduce this. This video comes from Riddle. Shout out to them for making this video. I really appreciate it. It's here for me to give my commentary on and to share with you guys. So check out their content. I'm sure it's pretty good. This seems very interesting thus far. So please check out Riddle.
Archaeologist Howard Carter and his companion Lord George Carnarvon were astonished when they entered the tomb of the glorified king in 1922. Instead of a pompous and spacious hall, they found themselves in a small, cramped room that looked like a warehouse. The location of the tomb also raised questions, as Tutankhamun was buried far from his royal ancestors. This, according to ancient Egyptians, prevented the pharaoh from being reunited with his family to rule in the spiritual world. Let's say the ancestors' tombs just ran out of space, but why wasn't there even a coffin for the pharaoh? All the indications are that Tutankhamun got second-hand attributes. He lay within a nest of 3 golden coffins, which fitted one inside another. They all look like the god of the dead, Osiris, lying on his back and holding the crook and flail in his crossed arms. But the middle coffin had a slightly different style, and its face didn't look like the faces on the other 2 coffins. Nor did it look like the face on Tutankhamun's death mask. Egyptologists assumed that among the 3 coffins, this middle coffin, along with some of Tutankhamun's other grave goods, was initially made for the mysterious Nefer-Neferuaten. It turned out that this woman was an enigmatic ruler whose name is recorded in inscriptions on the walls. Apparently, she lived at the time of Akhenaten.
Well, I mean, that would make sense because they called him the Boy King. I think they said they believe he died when he was like 18 years old or something. And he had trauma to his head. So that kind of makes sense, is that they expected him to probably live significantly longer, or maybe at least twice as long as that. Because I know people in ancient times, people died and, like they didn't live to be like 40 or 50 or something. Like that was old in those days. Just due to like malaria and just, unclean conditions. They didn't have the type of society we have today. It was a very different era. So people did not live as long. I mean, people in the Dark Ages didn't live that long. Like 50 or 60, like that was ancient. Like, wow, you live to be 50 or 60 years old, dude. Like, oh my God, like that was old. That's a really old person in the 14th or 15th century. So, with him, it makes sense is that they weren't planning to build his tomb because they just thought he was going to live a lot longer. But they think it was a chariot accident. He fell, he hit his head, and he died. And then just kind of went, well, we got to throw something together. So that would make sense.
Akhenaten, Tutankhamun's father, but died earlier and could never assert authority on her own. Thereby, her trail got lost in history. In addition, the undertakers cut off the part of the coffin that protruded from the sarcophagus, preventing the lid from closing. Later, archaeologists found fragments of Osiris sawn-off toes at the bottom of the sarcophagus. Nothing could erase the fact that Tutankhamun was buried hastily. After all, archaeologists found traces of readjustment everywhere, indicating that the tomb itself was intended for another dignitary. Likely, the pharaoh died suddenly and no one was prepared for that. But what was the cause of the pharaoh's death? There are so many of them that it's hard to settle on one. Tutankhamun was a child of 2 siblings. As a result, he inherited genetic defects and congenital clubfoot. He was limping all his life and moved with a walking cane. 350 gold-plated, finely painted walking canes were found in his tomb. He had a weakened immune system and brittle bones. Signs of malaria were found in his mummy. Despite his ailments, the young king enjoyed the fun and took rides in a chariot. Maybe this is why the leg of his mummy is broken. But it's still unclear why there's no heart, since Egyptians never removed this organ, believing it to be the center of a person's mind. King Tut's mummy is generally of low quality because it has a huge incision that no mummy has, stretching from the hip to the belly button. If we put all these facts together and attempt to assume how exactly did the young pharaoh die, we can get something like this. The crippled boy pharaoh with a terribly weak immune system took a chariot ride and fell off. But the chariot didn't continue moving straight. Instead, it turned around and went right across the king's chest. As a result, not only his bones were broken, but his heart was squashed as well. They tried to deliver his body to morticians as quickly as possible, but it started to decompose faster under the beating Egyptian sun. Sure thing, Tutankhamun's tomb wasn't ready, so he was placed in a cramped closet. His poor body was barely carried and haphazardly mummified. All rituals had to be given up, and the heart spot was filled with a handful of scarab beetle amulets. 3,000 years later, archaeologists found him, and as a cherry on top, dislodged a skull fragment when removed.
See, that gives credence to the that was one of the theories, was it was a chariot accident. Because he had some type of trauma to the back of his head. There was also another theory, though, was that they believe there was a high priest in Egypt who would have been like next to the throne if he died. And they believe that's sort of where the movie The Mummy, who was the villain, Imhotep, was supposedly that priest. And then that he was the priest that if Tutankhamun were to die, I believe this. I can't say this definitively, but I think I remember this historically. Imhotep was also like the builder of like one of the first pyramids or something too in Egypt. But I think they were saying that if Tutankhamun were to die, Imhotep would be able to take the throne from Tutankhamun's mother or something like that. There's something along those lines. I could be wrong. My memory is kind of hazy. Like I haven't, I used to be really into Egyptology, but there was something along the lines, and maybe it wasn't Imhotep, maybe it was another priest or something. But like they would be along for pharaohship if he were to meet his demise. So they were saying is they think maybe he was hit with a blunt object to kind of like maybe the chariot accident broke his leg, and then they kind of finished him off,
Moving the poor mummy out of the coffin. But the list of weird accidents doesn't end even there. On top of everything, Tutankhamun's mummy was on fire. Egyptologist Chris Naunton and a team of forensic scientists performed a virtual autopsy on the young pharaoh in the Channel 4 television documentary, Tutankhamun: The Mystery of the Burnt Mummy. Further examination of the mummy's flesh fragment showed that it was set on fire or burnt, but it's unlikely anyone burned the king's body on purpose. Firstly, ancient Egyptians wouldn't presume to abuse the body of someone who, even after death, holds their destiny in their hands. And secondly, the mummy was burnt while still sealed inside his coffin. It's pretty hard to deny the existence of a curse under these circumstances, isn't it? But it turns out there was a lot of oil and resin on Tutankhamun's body, so much so that during the tomb's opening, the mummy had to be literally scraped off the coffin's walls. In the documentary, fire investigators demonstrated how a chemical reaction of the embalming oils used on Tutankhamun's mummy led to his
But I mean, in reality, what do we know? Like, what other royal, pharaoh or royalty in Egypt? Like, what do we have to compare it with? You know what I'm saying? Like, how do we know? We don't, we haven't found a lot of the tombs of a lot of figures in Egypt. This is why this was so significant, because this was a pharaoh and this was his tomb. Like, so what do we have for comparison? Maybe that was a ritual. Maybe they burned the body. Maybe because there's so much speculation, there's so much theory about how ancient Egypt was, worked, or how it worked, or how it was ruled, or how it was done. It's all speculation, you know. And then so when they run into things that go, oh well, this doesn't fit the narrative of this situation, well, maybe this happened, or maybe, because it's all theory. It's all theory. But yes, he was obviously some form of royalty, because what was in the tomb and how he was buried in the sarcophagus. But I mean, outside of that, it's all theory.
Spontaneous combustion. Such negligence during the embalming process is a rare exception. But what could the investigators who opened the coffin have died of? After a series of unexplained deaths of scientists and archaeologists and members of their families, many adherents of the idea of the curse of the pharaohs appeared in the world. Archaeologist Arthur Mace, radiologist Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, and Carnarvon's brother Audrey Herbert died within a couple of years after the tomb's opening. They were followed by a member of the Egyptian royal family, Prince Ali Kamel Fahmy Bey, who was shot dead by his wife. Lord Carnarvon, who, together with Carter, was the first to see the tomb, also died. But the curse adherents didn't consider the average age of the scientists, which was 74 and a half years. 57-year-old George Carnarvon died of pneumonia and was generally predisposed to pulmonary disease his whole life. And Howard Carter, who was supposed to be the first to fall victim to the curse, died of natural causes at the age of 64, 16 years after the tomb's opening. Finally, Egyptologists point out that there was no such concept as a curse in Egyptian religious practice. A large number of people involved in other tomb openings.
So it seems like coincidence, and that's what I'm saying is there are odd coincidences. Don't get me wrong. I think there are odd coincidences, right? That this just so happened to happen at this time, and I've seen odd coincidences. I've witnessed them. I've lived them, but I think when something like that happens, it's our superstition. By nature, we're superstitious beings. We have certain belief systems or whatever that gives us superstition. And so we correlate things. We go, oh, well, this happened. Well, they did this, and all these things started happening. Well, here's the thing is, what if they didn't do that and all these things started happening? No one would have said anything. Nobody would have cared. They'd just been like, oh, well, all this stuff's happening. And that's what I'm saying. There are odd coincidences. And don't get me wrong, I believe in the unknown. I believe that there are things that do happen that we cannot explain. And possibly this may have been one of them, but it just could just be an odd coincidence.
Never experienced any mystical influence. However, whatever version you support, you're right. It seems that in Tutankhamun's story, there was room for both curse and accident. Apart from the fact that scientists are still unable to unveil the mystery of his death, newly available data is even more confusing. That makes Tutankhamun almost funny. He had more adventures than Mr. Bean, but there's still no comedy movie featuring him as the main character. Maybe that's because of the lack of an appropriate name. What do you think a comedy about Tutankhamun could be called?
Comedy about Tutankhamun, we could be called a comedy of errors. Yeah, based on what I just heard right now, his death, how his mummy was prepared. Like, it just seems like a lot of things were thrown together, you know, excuse me, tongue tied, together at the last minute, which gives credence to the fact that maybe he died very younger, far younger than they just thought he was going to die. So, but that would make sense, you know. I mean, outside of that, like I said, when it comes to curses, I'm not that. I might be superstitious, but I'm not that superstitious, in my own opinion. And but there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that cannot be explained. They're unexplainable, and you know, like it says at the end of this video, it gives you a lot of coincidences as to why these people died. Probably not from a curse. So, but I will do that royal family video. I am going to do the Itzy video. So, because they're intriguing to me, you know, I find them intriguing. And this is interesting questions. That's what we do. We ask the interesting questions. We want the interesting questions, people. And if you have interesting questions or you want me to review a video, you want me to do an episode on here of an interesting question, leave a comment below, like, and subscribe. So I will lean over to the peace sign. Peace and love to all of you. This is the end of the video. Peace.